And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson. After Selection Sunday, Johnson, for us fans of St. John's, we are still reeling after the BS, I guess, that happened. Not guessing, but definitely happening on Sunday. Not only for us, but for a multitude of schools. I know you're going to go into that a little bit. But we now know the field of 68 for this year's NCAA tournament. The first four is getting underway just right now as of this recording. So this is March, but this has been a rough start to March, to say the least.
Yeah, and it took the committee a whole almost 72 hours for them to actually make a response for this. And the response they had was really weak because the initial response they had was pretty contradictory when they said, "Oh well, St. John's had a 4-10 quad one record. Well, Virginia went 2-7, and that was good enough for the committee. Providence had I think 4-7 on the road, where other teams ahead of them were even worse on the road. Providence had 6 quad one wins, and if that was going to be one of your main barometers, that's great. We got preached the net ratings all year long, and then they want to say, well, it's a metric, or it's a sorting tool. It's not a metric. Well, no. Using the sort function in Microsoft Excel, that's a sorting system, right? That's a sorting
Yeah,
function, right?
I
This is a
know what
metric
you're getting at.
because they had this whole thing. It was supposed to replace BPI and KPI because there's a whole uh, a whole formula behind it, and they never really released it. And now you have a team 32 in the net that gets let out, 28 in the net that gets let out. Uh, you heard Kim English from Providence say metrics are BS, and I'm not paraphrasing that. He said the full word, but we'll keep it PG on this show. And pretty much he said what everyone was saying all year, that Big 12 teams scheduled garbage competition. They ran up the score by 50, and that improved their metrics. Shaheen Holloway said the game of basketball has changed the way he coached, because when you're blowing someone out, you pull your starters, you let them rest. But now you have more incentive to actually beat the living hell of the opponent. You know what? I'm sorry we're only winning by 20, but now I'm going to start pressing you when we're up by 20 with 4 minutes left, because every basket counts now. It's become a sick joke, and the main reason how they actually selected this was by KPI. They're not going to say this, but this was pretty much a copy paste of KPI with a couple modifications. Because if you look at it, the top 4 seeds, Purdue, Houston, UConn, North Carolina, are all 1-5 in the net. And guess what? Connecticut was number 3, but hey, you can't have them number 1. You can't have them number 3 because the other 4 of them lost. North Carolina's number 5. Well, they made further than even Tennessee. Iowa's the strongest 2 seed. Well, they won the Big 12 and they were 6th in the net. You see you see where I'm kind of going here, Nick?
Even Auburn, after
I'm
winning the
sorry.
SEC championship
Yeah.
too, they got a
Yeah.
4 seed.
Yeah. So it was kind of just
But you know what's
copy
funny?
and paste a
Yeah,
lot of this stuff.
I remember listening to the chairman. They even asked the one of the guys on the committee. They said, "This conference championship Sunday even factor into these brackets?" And they practically said no,
Yeah, so
uh, which
that's
is
what's
so
awful
dumb.
about this, because now you're gonna have the Big East is the only league that cares solely about basketball. You can have your opinion on that no matter what, but that is the sole basketball league. They do not play mediocre football like the ACC, um,
The
or the
ACC is in hot
Pac-12.
water too, and that's a topic for another day. But yeah,
That's a topic for college football.
yeah,
Going with Clemson, Florida State right now, but
hmm
they do not play mediocre football like the Mountain West, the Pac-12, or the ACC. This is a basketball only conference, so this means something to these teams. It means stuff to Creighton, to Marquette, to Seton Hall, Providence, St. John's, of course, UConn. Everyone in this conference, that's what they look forward to, going to Madison Square Garden at the end of the year. And you have these ACC teams. Well, I'm just going to phone it in because my seed doesn't matter at this point. That's what it came down to. The Big 10, the Big 12, Purdue, Houston, North Carolina. None of this matters to them. None of this really mattered to them. They just phoned it in. Arizona did the same thing. They phoned it in because the NCAA says, it doesn't really matter. So you know what? I think more teams next year, unless you fix this at the beginning of next year, they're gonna say, you know what? I'm just gonna rest my players now. This doesn't matter. And you know what? I'm gonna let bid stealers happen now. So hey, guess what, Seton Hall? You're on the fence. St. John's on the fence. Providence on the fence. Well, UConn knows they're gonna get a number 1 seed, so let's just sit him on the bench. Marquette, sit him on the bench. Creighton, sit him on the bench. And you're going to create this complacency now, kind of with college football bowl season. And I know the NCAA, everything is money at the end of the day, right? And if you want to kill your money and you want to kill your rating system, that's fine. St. John's UConn was the most streamed or most watched NCAA semifinal in Big East history.
Yeah,
And
and it lived up to the hype. That was a pretty good game.
And yeah, it lived up to the hype. And what's sickening about this was every analyst, every bracketologist, the best in the world, they had the average metric of over 100 bracketologists. They bracketmatrix.com does a fantastic job showing every single bracket. They have a rating system each year, how everyone gets there close. And all of them either had St. John's either the first four out or the first four in. There were about 40% of brackets that had them in and 60% that had them just on the bubble, either the first or the second team out. And the committee said, nope, they weren't even close, which makes me believe since conference championship Sunday and Saturday don't matter, St. John's could have beaten UConn and they wouldn't even have been in the first four out. That's how little this means. You could beat the number one overall seed. And then they flat out said that today of Seton Hall in Connecticut. They literally said that, you know what, it doesn't matter that Seton Hall beat the number one overall seed. That said that did not factor into their decision process whatsoever.
Yeah.
So you could be a mediocre Pac-12 team and make it in there. You could be a mediocre Big 12 team and win 20 games and beat Oklahoma was ahead of Seton Hall, by the way, a team that won 8 games in their conference. Won 8 games in the conference, had a terrible non-conference, and they still had a Seton Hall. Yep. Even though Seton Hall had went over number one seed convincingly by 15 points. It was robbery in the highest factor. And I don't want to cut you off, though, Nick. I'm almost done my rant here.
No, you're fine.
Val Ackerman has been radio silence. That response she sent after 24 hours, I could have did something better in Google AI. I could have had an AI statement would have meant more to that. She hasn't been fighting for this conference, and there's thousands of fans around the country, or especially on the East Coast, agreeing with this now. Because you have to think about, what has Val Ackerman actually done for the Big East in the last decade? What has she done besides... I can't think of one thing that she did. The previous commissioner, when the Big East was in that transition period, it secured the rights to the image and likeness of the Big East. It got the Fox deal. It got the rights to play Madison Square Garden. It added Creighton and Butler to strengthen, and Xavier to strengthen the conference when everyone was leaving. And what has Val done in 10 years? Well, she picked up the phone when UConn came crawling back, and that's about it. But I could have picked up that phone, and you could have too.
Yeah.
She's done nothing. And your biggest publicists right now for the Big East are former coaches that haven't been coaching the Big East since the old Big East. You had guys like Jim Boeheim go to bat for the Big East right now. And you know how much he despises Seton Hall, Providence, St. John's, UConn, all those teams. He came to bat for them. You have analysts, you have members of the media and journalists. And you have current coaches coming to bat for it. But Val Ackerman, silent.
All 3 coaches that from the Big East that made the tournament have even said that it's kind of, an outrage that some of these teams didn't make it. And my point was, I was going to bring up the Seton Hall factor, how they won 13 games in conference play, and I think it's the first time maybe in the history of the Big East or the first time in a while, I don't remember the exact stat, but a team that's won 13 games in conference play.
First time in 45. First time ever in the history of the Big East. The first time in over 45 years.
So in the first time ever in the history of the conference, a team that won 13 conference games doesn't make the NCAA tournament. And as you pointed out, they weren't even the first team out if they, let's say, made it. Oklahoma was. And yeah, I'm not going to go too much into it. I said my piece on Sunday with you about it off the air, obviously. It's really a disgrace how, even if St. John's didn't make it, it's more of how they went about it. I understand there was bid stealers and stuff like that. Excuse my language, but shit happens. It happens.
Yeah, right. Obviously this happens, and we knew at the end of the day, hey, all these teams are not going to make it. We were expecting one of St. John's, Seton Hall, and Providence to make it.
Exactly.
And the general consensus was, may the best team win. That's what we came down to. If these bid steals didn't happen, we were expecting 2 of them. But we've said, you know what? We're expecting 1.
But to have a team like Virginia, who, and this is no disrespect to any Virginia fans that listen to the podcast potentially, but to have a team like Virginia, who had the game won against NC State, gave up a buzzer beater, sent the game to overtime, then they lost in overtime by 8 points.
Well, Nick, you forgot to not to cut you off. that game doesn't matter now because the conference tournament doesn't matter. So it's kind of like
Eric,
a
that's
never realm of
I know.
basketball where nothing, the impacts,
And
the
even
results of the games don't matter that week.
and even then, they didn't have like a great like compared to the bubble teams. They didn't have a really good,
None of
the
their
net.
metrics are good, and I'm going to mean this with full offense. There was zero good metrics for Virginia. Their Ken Palm was awful. Their net was atrocious. They collapsed towards the end of the season, and they got rewarded with a tournament berth.
Yeah,
They didn't have any quad. Your best win all year was at Clemson. That
yeah.
is your best win of the year. It was at Clemson. And those
That's what
other games you played, you got blown up by Memphis by 23 points, who is didn't even make the tournament. They're playing in the knit right now. You lost to NC State multiple times. Only reason they're in the tournament is because they had that run because everyone gave up in the ACC tournament. They have a 30-point loss to Virginia Tech, and the committee looked at them, and said, you know what, this is our team.
yeah. I again, I don't understand it. It really doesn't make any sense, and it sucks because I love March Madness. I love this time of the year, but even when like you're a fan of one of these teams, and you're expected like especially for us, like we as soon as you beat Seton Hall, you're expecting that's it. That's cemented our spot. There's no way we don't make it.
It wasn't even us saying it too. Every single bracketologist
Every
at that
single
point
person
had us
kept
in
saying it.
the tournament. That's what it was.
And
And
it's different if let's say, they play UConn, they get blown out, right? Like they lose by 20,
if I
30
had
points.
lost by
And then
30, 40 points to UConn, I would have said, you know what? Good. That was
but
it. Have a
they
good
lost by
season.
5 points. It's not even a bad loss. Like credit.
Remember, they
Now,
could have beaten them. It wouldn't have mattered.
right. And at the end of the day, listen, it comes down to, for some of these teams, like there's not I don't know what much else you can do. Like Kim English, you mentioned earlier, the metrics apparently don't mean don't mean bullshit anymore, and he's not wrong. Now we're in a spot where we're going into this NCAA tournament, and yes, it might be
We've devolved
it might be fun, but at the same
because
time,
these metrics were chosen because to eliminate the favoritism, to kind of unblur the lines a little bit. Say, hey, this is what we're going to judge it on, and then the committee pretty much says, oh yeah, by the way, when we had 8 or 9 people in this room, each metric meant a different amount to someone, so we just kind of threw that out of the window. That's what they said. They just pretty much threw all the metrics out of the window, and that was it. And when you have a team, an AD like Butler, that's in from this conference that doesn't go to bat either, I think he should have his seat revoked by the other Big East teams. They should do a vote of no confidence and remove him from that board.
I'll make my last comment about this situation. This situation itself is kind of making me think that at some point they're going to make the tournament expanded to maybe like a
100.
72 team
It's all
tournament.
dollars and cents at the end of the day.
Yeah, the NCAA is going to they're going to I'm trying to think of the word. They're going to make sure
Spin
that
this.
yeah, they're going to spin this to the point where it will work in their favor. And now, because of all this, talk with about how these teams got screwed, now they could be like, oh, look, now we're adding 4 more teams. So your team possibly can't get screwed now unless, don't win your games at the end of the day. So the
So
NCAA is going to win
this
at the end of the
this
day.
is what
Which
they're going to
sucks.
do. They did it to the right conference too because the Big East was formed around having media markets. For a brief history lesson for everyone, the Big East wanted media markets from the major cities in the East Coast. So you have the Washington media market in Georgetown, Villanova in Philadelphia, St. John's, Seton Hall, New York, New Jersey. You have the Hartford market in Connecticut. You have Providence in Providence, Rhode Island. So
Well,
it
the
was
Paul
formed
sucks at
around
Chicago too.
yeah, you have. I mean, historically the Paul was in there, but yeah, you have Chicago, the Paul in
Yeah,
Chicago right now. Uh, so it was formed around major media markets. And back in the day, you had Boston College, where I guess Chicago has kind of replaced Boston with a bigger
Miami.
media market. Yeah, so it was formed around media markets, and that's what you're going to get now because you have the New York media kind of drumming it up right now. I'm sure the same thing's happening in Providence, Philadelphia. It's happening in Chicago, so you can have this kind of war drum, and then the NCAA is going to look. Oh yeah, look at all these media markets saying that we need to expand, and that's what's going to really cost to expand at the end of the day because they want more money.
Yeah. All right. So after all that, I think Johnson. Let's go into the
I'm
tournament
done
itself.
ranting into the microphone for
Yeah,
10 minutes.
no one can really blame us after what happened. I mean, I know everyone at this point knows how it's been a rough couple of days for us, and let's just now look at let's push that to the side, and now let's look at the NCAA tournament itself. Now, I mentioned obviously we have the 68 teams left that are in this bracket as always. The first 4 is currently being taken underway right now. Wagner is playing Howard in the first game of the first 4, but let's look at the bracket overall. Johnson, you could pick a region if you want to start, and I'll preview that. If it's up to you, whatever region you
Let's
want
start
to
off
look
the
at
East
first.
region. Let's start off the
Okay,
East.
so look at the East region, and obviously UConn, the defending national champion, the Big East champion this season, their first Big East championship since 2011. They are the number one overall seed for this NCAA tournament, and with right doing so. They've had a monster season, but this is pretty much the bracket of conference champions. You look at who else is in this bracket. You have Iowa State coming off a Big 12 championship. You have Illinois coming off a Big 10 championship. Auburn coming off an SEC championship. San Diego State was one game away from winning the Mountain West title. And then in the same bracket, you also have, as I mentioned, San Diego State, who made that Final Four run last year, as well as Florida Atlantic, who made their Final Four run last year. You have an up and comer like BYU that's had a pretty strong season. Duquesne won the A10. They were one of those bid stealers from this past week, so they made it as an 11th seed. You have UAB as the American champion. They were another bid stealer this season. Yale winning on a buzzer beater to win the Ivy League title. And then you have other teams like Washington State have had a pretty solid year. Drake has been a nice up and comer. And then you have Northwestern, who could maybe make some noise if possible. But you look at this bracket, Johnson, overall. Do you have a matchup in this first round that you could say to yourself, I could see a quote unquote essential upset? Like, what
Yeah,
would you
is this
pick
an
to be your
upset? Is that
upset
I
for the
guess
first
the
round?
10-7. I guess the 10-7 would be my upset. I'd pick Drake over
See,
any of these teams.
I was thinking that game. The problem might with that game is I think Drake is the favorite.
I mean, yeah, I guess they're favorites betting wise. We want
But
to talk about traditional 10-7 matchup.
yeah,
That's what I'm
traditional
asking you.
wise, yeah. I
Well,
have a
listen, their
different
metrics are
matchup, I
great.
could
At
say,
the end of the
but
day, their metrics are great. They're high in the Ken Palm. I think they're top 50 in the Ken Palm, so they definitely deserve to be there. They could have gotten an at-large bid if they didn't make their tournament. Um, I mean, it's a very fun, exciting. I don't want to say exciting style of basketball. I want to say they play pretty standard, but their defense is going to be where they kind of get carried. In the last 10 games, I think they have one of the top 10 defenses in the country. So Washington State's kind of going into a buzzsaw here, and I'm looking forward to that.
yeah, Washington State obviously coming off their loss in the semifinals of the Pac-12 tournament. But I think I was thinking the same thing. I guess like into the traditional style, a 10 over a 7 is an upset. The only other game where I could see an upset happening, maybe Duquesne over BYU. I could see the Dukes maybe pulling that one off.
See, I think they're overseeded too. I think they should be like
But
a 13 or a 14
right,
seed.
but
But
I think that's the issue with me too. I think we both said it at the same time too. I think we were stunned that they were an 11 seed. It seems like a lot of the conference championship bid stealers this tournament got an 11 seed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I'm gonna go with the same thing. I'm gonna go with Drake over Washington State as my potential upset for this region. But again, Drake is the favorite, so betting wise, it's not really an upset. But traditional tournament wise, that would be technically the upset you would see to happen. So, with that being said, before we go on to the next region, who do you think comes out of this region? And do you have any other upset happening in this region, or do you just think that's probably the only one you're going to look out for?
UConn by a country mile, and don't surprise me if UAB upsets San Diego State.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah, San Diego State hasn't really, looked. They've been on and off from last year's team.
If UConn plays as good as they were in the Big East tournament, they are going to bounce the winner of the FAU Northwestern game by 30 points, and they will bounce Auburn by 15, and they will bounce the winner of the Elite Eight game or the winner of that Sweet 16 game, maybe Illinois or Iowa State, by 10 or 11 points. So I
Yeah,
think they should get rid of this. And now that I said that, I just probably mushed them to oblivion. So we'll find
maybe.
out.
I think for me, um, it's UConn's to lose. I think the scariest matchup is probably the Sweet 16 if they play Auburn. I picked Auburn.
I think they will destroy Auburn. It won't
I
even be close.
I picked Auburn to win the SEC title, and they did win the SEC championship. And I think Auburn has a good enough team to win. I think realistically, these conference championships at the end of the day, these champions in this bracket got screwed having to play in UConn's bracket because they deserve to be seated in a different bracket where they could probably thrive and make it to an Elite Eight or a potential Final Four. Them having these champions having to play in the same bracket as UConn really is not fair to some of these teams. I think for me, I'm expecting an Elite Eight matchup between UConn and Illinois. That's what I have going down between in this region. But I think for me, UConn gets it done. The only upset I can really see happening is probably Drake. I trust San Diego State to get past UAB. And you always know about those Ivy League schools. Maybe Yale gives Auburn a little bit of a test, but I still think Auburn gets it done at the end of the day. And I think Northwestern beats FAU in the first round. So I'm not really sold on the Owls this season like they were last season. I think the Wildcats get it done, but they're not going to get past UConn. I got the Huskies winning the East region.
One note about UConn. Uh, so there is a metric called Bartorvik. It's similar to Ken Pom, but he has his own metrics, and it maps conference efficiency. By the end of the year, St. John's and Marquette almost had the same exact efficiency. So I think this is a great lesson for everyone going forward in this tournament. You saw what St. John's team. So if St. John's and Marquette had pretty much an identical average defensive and offensive efficiency. And this isn't just me just like spitballing. This is backed up by statistics. It was almost 1-to-1. Marquette had a slightly better defense and offense, but that's only by a couple points. The point I'm trying to make here is if St. John's, when it was firing on all cylinders, still couldn't take it to UConn, and when Marquette kind of slowed down, so it kind of showed you if two similar offense and defenses kind of showed you what UConn can do. Even when UConn was struggling, they still beat Marquette like that, and they beat him soundly. So I would be very if UConn just had its worst postseason game against Marquette when it starts shooting like 1 of 10 from the field, I would be very afraid.
Yeah. Now, UConn has been very efficient this season. That is very scary for a team that's coming off a national championship last year. So they got a really good
And
chance
by
to
the
go back to
way,
back.
the difference between an offensive efficiency between St. John's, Marquette, and Creighton and UConn is about 7 points, and their defense is better too. It's the best defense in the conference. So
No.
it's going to be very, very scary hours for UConn. Probably the number one offense in the country, and probably a top five defense to go along with it.
So now let's go to the Midwest region, and I'll pose the same question for you for this region as well as the East. I'm going to pose this question for each region that we have for this NCAA tournament. What do you think is the upset you're looking forward to in this region that could come down? There are a couple possibilities because this is a very tough region for some of these higher seeds.
So I took a look at this, and I'm going to kind of clarify what I mean by upset. So upset is anything that would be declared if we look 10 years from now and say, oh yeah, look this year if a 10 beat the 7, that's an upset. So that's the way I'm going to go look at it. I'm not looking at Vegas odds, anything like that. Give me New Mexico over Clemson.
That's in the West region.
Oh, that's in the West. I thought that was in the
Nah,
Midwest.
it's the West region. So we know your West region upset, but
Well,
yeah.
that's my. So let's go to the West then. At this point,
Okay, so we'll go to the West then. We'll go back to that region. So you have New Mexico over Clemson?
yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I think New Mexico make a run. I actually have New Mexico as well in this region. However, they're not my upset I'm looking into for this region.
I know which one you're talking about
I think
too.
you know exactly which one I'm going for. I'm going with GCU over St. Mary's. I could really see GCU making a run this season, even if they get past St. Mary's. If they could play Alabama in the second round, I think it's a favorable matchup for Grand Canyon as well. Bama's defense really struggled in the SEC tournament and for most of this entire season inside the paint. If GCU goes inside the paint, they could really pull it off. Now, obviously, you got to get past the Gales and St. Mary's first, coming off a WCC championship. But I could really see Grand Canyon making some noise and being that quintessential Cinderella run for this year's NCAA tournament. So for this region, give me Grand Canyon to pull off the upset. I have a
Yeah, I
couple
mean
though in this
another
one.
one I would look at would be Nevada over Dayton. Dayton
I have that one
doesn't
as
have
well.
Dayton doesn't have a single win over against anyone in the field. So why am I supposed to believe they're going to have a single win over here? Give me Nevada.
The West region for me is the most wide open region, I think, in this entire tournament.
I would say it's wide open for. I would say these are my favorites to make it out of the West, in no particular order. I would say UNC, Alabama, New Mexico, and then it's the field.
You have New
I
Mexico
mean, I'm
ranked
not.
down. Okay.
I don't really believe in Arizona, Nevada, or Baylor. I just don't
I'm
believe in
having
them. But
trouble. I'm having trouble believing them too, but I'll give you. Well, we can make our pick for that region, obviously. Now since we made the same one for UConn. So who do you have coming out of the West region?
give me UNC 2-1 seeds. I know it's boring, but before let me explain my thought process here.
Okay.
Traditionally speaking, the average aggregate is somewhere like 13 or 14 with all the seeds. Last year is like 25, so by the law of averages, it eventually has to reel itself back in. So, spoiler alert, I'm gonna have all lower seeds, not all ones, but all lower seeds, lower than 4.
Uh See, I don't have UNC making it to the Elite Eight. There's going to be a little bit of a stutter later on when we pick our Cinderella run. I don't want
I
them
mean,
to, you know.
I know what's the team you're probably thinking of, but continue.
I don't know if maybe it isn't the team you're thinking of, but maybe we'll have to see. For me, I think whoever wins the Baylor Arizona matchup is going to get to the Final Four. And obviously, this tournament being in Arizona, maybe it's not wise to pick the team that is the home, has got the home court advantage for a potential tournament. And I know what Arizona's history is. Obviously, last year they lost to Princeton in the first round, and who knows what to say. Maybe they lose again to a 15 seed. It could very much well happen. But I think the Wildcats get it done. I was still very spurned by what happened in the Pac-12 championship tournament as well when they lost to Oregon. But I think they have there's a lot of question marks about this team, and people are expecting them to they gotta do something at some point with this team because they've had so many really bad losses the last couple seasons. I think Tommy Lloyd and company get it done this year, and I think they get to the Final Four. So I'll go with the Wildcats to win the West.
All right, I don't believe him at all, but congrats for your pick, I guess.
I don't either. This is like I said, this is the most wide open region. I can make a case for a bunch of teams, honestly, in my opinion. But I won't spoil because I do have my Cinderella run in this region, so I won't spoil it just yet. But for now, I'll take Arizona to win the West. So
So would you like to go back to the Midwest
let's
now?
go back to the Midwest, yeah. And this is another region where I'm having trouble with too, because Purdue, obviously the number one seed, and we've known the history of Purdue. Obviously, last year losing to a 16. Um, they just lost the Big Ten semifinal to Wisconsin. Don't think this is going to be an easy bracket for them as well. You have teams like Tennessee and Creighton, Kansas. If they get healthy, could be a threat. You have a couple upset possibilities as well. So, being on that topic, what do you think is the biggest upset opportunity for this region?
It's so hard, but I mean, I'll be real with you. I think all these teams are gonna be safe from upsets. But if I'm trying to pick between two,
I think I know
and
which two you're talking about.
I think you do, right? So obviously the obvious one is McNeese State over Gonzaga, right? 30 and 3 on the year, coached by Will Wade, great head coach. Not really any quality wins, but that's just kind of the conference they're in. They had a big opener versus VCU, and they destroyed UAB by I think 20 points. A win over Michigan as well, but that's not saying much. So they have a couple power conference wins, but really nothing else. But I'm going to pick the Sanford Bulldogs in the NCAA tournament for the first time in over 20 years to upset Kansas, assuming
Okay.
they're still banged up with injuries. So if I had to pick a team, I'm going to
Yeah.
pick Sanford.
Yeah, Hunter Dickinson and Keith McCullough are the two biggest players on Kansas, and right now they're still game time decisions. So there's a possibility they don't play against Sanford this upcoming week. So that's a very good possibility that Sanford pulls up that upset. But for me, I think that it's the one you already said. I'm going to pick McNeese over Gonzaga. I think that's for me the possibility of an
It's
upset
very close.
happening.
I could see it happening too because Gonzaga has struggled this year at times.
And I don't
They've really
really
picked it up the last month, but
right.
they've struggled.
That Kentucky win was huge for them because it obviously got them that 5 seed. If not for that win, they would probably be around a 6 or a 7 seed in this NCAA tournament. Um, but I think McNeese has a great opportunity to win this one too. You have Will Wade, you mentioned as the head coach. We've seen what previous head coaches can do from when they coach in a Power Five and they go to a smaller conference and they build up a team like this. And they've had success in the NCAA tournament before. I can see McNeese pulling off this win against a Gonzaga team that, compared to years past, is not as dominant as they used to be. So watch out for McNeese this year in this NCAA tournament. I think they could make some noise. But with that, who do you have winning the Midwest?
Give me the Creighton Blue Jays here.
Creighton, okay.
Give me the Blue Jays. I think they'll have a nice, easy win over Akron. South Carolina is an overseeded 6 seed. Uh, Tennessee could lose to Texas in the round of 32, and if
Very
that's the
possible.
case, give me Creighton. And then you're really relying on Purdue to make it to the Elite Eight. So
Which,
that's one thing. And if Kansas is speed up a little bit, I'm gonna take a fully healthy Creighton team over a half hobbled Kansas team.
okay. My initial thought was also Creighton when I was looking at this region. I thought, looking at the
It's
seeds, I
also
think
the Big East bias for us. I'll be real. I'm gonna be very toxic and biased about this
I'm
now.
sure I would just probably go to spoil what the next region pick's going to be. But when I looked at it more, I think South Carolina could give them a threat in the second round. Even Oregon. I mean, obviously, those two teams are riding on a nice wave of momentum these last couple weeks. I think Creighton gets past them, but I think for me, the team that I'm looking into is a team that obviously had a bad SEC tournament, and they need to, ride the ship and make sure that a blowout like what they happened against Mississippi State doesn't happen again. I think Tennessee comes out of the Midwest for me. I don't trust Purdue anymore. I'm done. I'm done trying. I've done it every year, and they spurn me every year. And I'm not willing to try one more time. Tennessee very much well could do the same thing to me. They could probably lose in the second round, like you mentioned, to Texas. Hell, who knows? They're playing St. Peter's in the first round. Maybe they pull off another stunning upset like they did before. But I think Tennessee has themselves a well-oiled machine roster. I think they could get into the Final Four, and I don't even think they play Purdue in the Elite Eight. I have Kansas getting healthy and getting into that Elite Eight, but I just don't think Kansas is going to have enough to get past the Volunteers. So give me Tennessee out of the Midwest to make it to the Final Four.
All right, picking Tennessee. So that this leaves one region left, and that is
The South.
the South region.
And the South region has Houston as the number one seed. You have Marquette, the number two, Kentucky, the number three, Duke, the number four, Wisconsin's a five seed, and you have other teams like Texas Tech. You have Florida, Nebraska, A&M to mention. You have some potential upset bids like JMU and Vermont, maybe. NC State obviously won the ACC championship, winning 5 games in 5 days to get to this point. And don't even look past the playing game between Boise State and Colorado, because one of those two teams could very much well win that first 4 game and then potentially beat Florida. And who knows, maybe beats a Marquette team if the Marquette gets into the second round. So what do you have as your upset for potentially in this round in the mid and in the South?
I think this is kind of obvious, right?
Is it though?
Is it because okay, there's the Duke Vermont game, right? Anyone who's talked to me knows I love this Vermont
You love
program.
the Catamounts.
Catamounts, a great program, and even though they beat St. John's a couple of years ago, uh, always in the tournament mix as a 12 to 14 seed. I believe if they were in a major conference, they'd be similar to like a Wichita State.
Yep.
Because even though, like, listen, I know they were MVC, but the American East is not, and the MVC is not even comparable. And I know we're kind of getting semantics right now, but if they were in a better conference, like a better mid-major, say they were in the, let's say the American, I think the Vermont would have a lot better chance with recruiting, and they have a good head coach, and obviously you'd have to go with facilities, yada yada, all that fun stuff. But anyway, I'm not picking. I'm not picking Vermont. I'm gonna pick James Madison over Wisconsin.
Okay.
James Madison is a great team that's rated Ken Palm. I would say it's probably similar to like a Utah State or Northwestern when it comes to terms of analytics. Great offense. Defense is a little shaky. Wisconsin's kind of been faltering the last month or so, and their defense hasn't been great. So I think if they catch them at the right time, this could be an upset. I'm still gonna take Wisconsin, but that's my potential upset here is James Madison over Wisconsin.
I looked at that one too, and I think that's a really strong possibility. But for the sakeness of the show, I won't pick the same thing as you. I know we already did that with Drake and Washington State, but that region was really tough to pick an upset. For me, I think NC State. I don't know if they're going to win. Because we saw this with they kind of reminded me of Georgetown a couple years ago when they won the Big East, where they won a certain amount of games
This
in a
team's
certain
gonna
amount
get
of
smoked.
days, right? And then everyone was picking them. Maybe not everyone, but I at least was picking them after they won the Big East title. They played, I think, Colorado that
Oh,
season
I knew they were
in
gonna
the
get
first round.
smoked.
And you imagine you said they were going to get blown out, and they did get blown out in that game. Maybe there's some kind of a similar scenario in this season when they play Texas Tech in the first round. I'm just not sold on Texas Tech as maybe any other team is. And I know you're not really sold on them as well. So I'll just take NC State to win in the first round over Texas Tech. I think, they have some good playmakers on their team. We know about, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. You know exactly what the player I'm talking about um,
On Wisconsin or James.
On NC State.
Oh boy, the power forward, the six
DJ
nine guy,
Burns, I think his name is.
DJ Burns.
DJ
Yes,
Burns, yeah. He's a special
he's
player.
electric.
a huge reason why they won against Virginia in overtime, and obviously a huge reason why they were able to beat North Carolina and obviously other teams in the ACC tournament. But I think they match up very well with Texas Tech at the end of the day, and I think they could really pull off this win. Um, I think you look at what their stat wise, and these two teams are kind of similar at the end of the day in terms of how they play. I could see NC State winning again. The only concern for me in that matchup is obviously after you played 5 games in 5 days, and now you have what, maybe a 2 days rest. You know, how much wear and tear does that on your body? One, and is taking that day or two off actually, detrimental to you because obviously you keep going, you got all this, you know, momentum going with you, and then you just stop, and then now you have to go back after 2 days rest. I really want to pick JMU because I think that's probably where I think an upset happens in this region, but I'm not sold on Texas Tech so much, so I'm going to take NC State over them. But who do you think wins the South now at the end of the day?
Spoiler alert, we're going back to 1985. Big East says it's the lowest amount of teams since
Yeah.
1993. Well, we're going to turn the clock back even further to 1985 with three Big East teams making the Final Four. Give me the Marquette Golden Eagles. Shaka Smart finally gets his March moment, and Marquette is going to the Final Four.
Okay. And Shaka Smart, that would be good for the Big East. Obviously, the money going towards that would be very good for the
I don't
conference.
even care about the money. I think these teams are
I
going to be
know.
playing out of spite.
For me, you're gonna hate this pick. I'm gonna take Duke, and I hate
No
it.
thanks.
I hate it because they could lose in the first round easily. Hell, they could lose in the second round easily if they play Wisconsin. Because Wisconsin, I think, is really underrated. I think they have a really strong team, but not so on Houston. I think if Duke were to play Houston, I think Duke wins that game. And I have Duke playing Kentucky in the Elite Eight in this matchup. I know it's a quintessential blue blood matchup, and that game could really go either way because of how Kentucky's defense has been this season. It could be a
Yeah, I mean,
really
I want
high
to kind of
scoring
mention
game.
that.
Yeah, go
So
on.
Kentucky has probably one of the best offenses, a top five offense in March as per Ken Palm.
Yeah,
Do you want to guess what their defense is rated?
it's Sky at the bottom. Very, very bad.
Well, I'll give you a hint. So out of all these teams, right?
Hmm.
The teams that have a worse defense than Kentucky, as per Kempom, are the Sanford Bulldogs, right? Um, the UAB, Morehead State, and by the way, Morehead State analytically defense not that much different. Akron's defense is ranked higher than Kentucky. Oakland has a worse defense.
Funny enough, Kentucky's
Long Beach
playing
State.
Oakland.
I would say St. Peter's Peacocks, but they actually have a better defense in Kentucky. Montana State, Stetson, Grambling State, Howard, and Wagner. And
What?
Florida Atlantic has the worst defense by 1 point in the ranking. So Kentucky and Florida Atlantic's defense are almost
Oh,
identical.
yeah. You mentioned Oakland and Kentucky's defense being bad. You want to guess what the over under for that game is for the round one
Oh
matchup?
God, probably 180. Not
100.
180, but like 165.
You're close. 163 and a half is the over under.
163. I should make lines.
Yeah, I might take that. That might be the lock of the century. But yeah, I think I think whoever gets past, and I'll tell
Listen,
you what,
if they could lock in for defense, they're gonna win the whole thing.
I
And
could
I said this last year too.
right, and a team that I could see making maybe a run in this tournament in this bracket is even Florida. I mentioned them in the SEC tournament, and they went in all the way to the championship game. I think they have a very underrated team as well.
Walter Clayton's one of the premier guards in the country, and it's exciting
Yeah,
to watch him play.
yeah, and I think they could potentially get past Marquette. I mean, Marquette's getting Tyler Cole back, which is huge for them. But I don't think that's an easy game for Marquette to beat Florida. I think Florida could easily win that game, and hell, they could even beat a potential Kentucky in the Sweet 16. I think Florida is a team to watch out for in this region. But I think Kentucky figures it out. You have the coach at Calipari. He obviously knows what it needs to take to get to a potential Final Four and Elite Eight spot. But for me, I just think Duke has a talented roster where it would be kind of I know it's happened before where I say, oh, Duke has a talented roster. It'd be really impossible for them not to be in the Final Four, and then they lose in the first round. But that could very much well happen again this season. But I think Duke gets to the Final Four regardless. So we now gone through our teams and who are going to be in the Final Four. We'll go back to that in just a little bit. But let's now talk about the Cinderella run. There's bound to be one Cinderella potentially for this NCAA tournament. Hell, there could be multiple. We saw a lot of those last season. If there is a team, Johnson, in your mind that could pull off a Cinderella run this season, who do you think that team could be?
Oh man, we've had such good Cinderellas the last couple of years, especially with St. Peter's making all the way to the Elite Eight as a 15 seed. They're back in the tournament. I'm not going to pick them though. It's by Cinderella. It has to be at least around, not round of 32, but a Sweet 16, right?
Um, well, it depends also what type of seed you're thinking of for Cinderella run.
Is does New Mexico count?
I would count
An
them.
11 seed. They're an 11 seed out
I
of a
would.
non-Power 5 conference.
Would you count that? Would you count it as a seed above 7, like 7 and above?
Yeah, I would say above 7 because if you're
Okay,
coming
so
in as a
maybe
7 seed, you're expecting to win your first game.
maybe my Cinderella
I
run
would say
isn't
maybe I would say maybe 9. I would say maybe
okay.
I would
So
say
I might need to.
definitely 8 or 9.
So I might need to change
Seven's a
my pick then.
maybe.
I might need to change my pick because I had a team, but they're in a Power Five conference, so I don't know if necessarily that is
Well,
a
no, it's I mean if
Cinderella run.
listen, if NC State goes on a run, that's even though they're a Power 5 conference, that's a Cinderella run. No one expected that.
It's
It's a
not going to
team
be
that
them.
you don't I would say it's a team that no one expects to get to the Sweet 16
Okay, and
like in a million years.
I think the team I have is potentially fits that narrative, but well, I'll let you go first. Who do you think is the Cinderella pick for you?
It's New Mexico for me. I think they will demolish Clemson and beat Baylor in a competitive game, and then anything after that's kind of gravy for them.
If it is Baylor, you never know. Toothpaste could pull it off. Colgate.
Don't forget about Yale. Is it Yale?
No, they're playing Colgate. Yale is playing Auburn.
No. Who Yale beat Baylor a couple of years ago, right?
Yes, yes,
With Torian Prince.
yes. Of course,
Yeah,
you have
so
to
it's happened
you
before.
have to
They're
go
kind
up
of
with
prone
two
to
hands
this.
and bring the ball down. That's considered a rebound. Yale got more of
Remember
those than Baylor did.
2016, watching that in I guess the
We were in high
rec room at
school.
St. John's.
Oh
No,
no,
we were in
we were in
college.
college. We were in college, right? I listen. No, hopefully none of the teachers are listening, but I was watching NCAA tournament games while we were in high school in
Oh well.
class. So you said earlier you think you knew what my Cinderella pick was. Do you want to take a guess of who it is?
Well, now if it's a 7 seed, I have absolutely no idea.
It's not a seven. Well, it's a little bit above a 7 seed. Who did you originally think it was?
I thought it was gonna be Florida.
I thought about Florida. I really did. I having trouble picking them against Marquette though. That's my problem. Um, for me, it's a team that really showed something in their conference tournament.
Is it the Aggies?
It is not the Aggies. I actually have them losing to Nebraska in the first round. I think Nebraska is a way better team than them, in my opinion.
Okay, then I'm out of it. Then
I've got Mississippi State being the Cinderella team for me.
I would have never guessed that in a million years. You could
I
have
have
given me 60
Mississippi
teams. I
State.
would have not guessed. I probably would have guessed them less.
I have Mississippi State going to the Elite Eight. I
I
know.
mean, I can't buy it yet.
I don't want to buy it either. They probably won't have it happen. Here's my theory about this. I think North Carolina, out of all the 1 seeds, and this might be biased. Purdue is obviously still there. I think they're the weakest 1 seed in the tournament. North Carolina. I don't think they deserve to be a 1 seed after what happened at NC State. But again, as we mentioned earlier, as conference championship games, at this point don't matter, right? Mississippi State really showed me something when they beat Tennessee in the SEC title game. They blew them out of the water. They led wire to wire, and they got that win. And then they almost beat Auburn in the semifinal. They really gave Auburn a tough test in that matchup. That was the only tough game Auburn had, mostly up until the championship game, which was close for the most part, and then Auburn took away in the second half. I could see Mississippi State, and again, they have to get past Michigan State. It's not going to be easy facing Tom Izzo. I could see Mississippi State beating Izzo, then beating North Carolina, and then I have them beating Alabama in an SEC matchup in the Sweet 16. And then I have them losing to Arizona in the Elite Eight. If they play Arizona, they can make a case to maybe make the Final Four. Do I think it happens? Probably not. Again, after what we saw last season, I guess any team is realistically possible to make the Final Four. But I'm trying to think outside of the box. because last season I really didn't do that, and uh, didn't really work out in our favor. I'm trying to think of who my Cinderella pick was last season because it was not pretty. I remember that, but and I'm looking right now. I think my Cinderella pick was NC. Ah, funny enough, it was NC State. Yours was Iona. I wonder why you would pick Iona.
I would have never picked Iona. What do you
Yeah,
mean?
I have. I wonder why. So, regardless, I will take Mississippi State to be my Cinderella pick. I think it's an outside the box pick. I think when you do these NCAA tournament brackets, you gotta try to think outside the box sometimes. If it wasn't them, then I'd probably go McNeese. I think they could beat Gonzaga, and they just announced that Keith McCullough is going to be out for the entire tournament. So if Kansas gets past Sanford, I could see McNeese getting to the Sweet 16 to play Purdue. So if not Mississippi State, then McNeese would be my Sweet 16 Cinderella run. So that's the two teams I'm going to look out for. But let's now go over who we think is going to be in the national championship game now. We'll recap who our teams that we think are going to make the Final Four. For Johnson, you have UConn, Creighton, Marquette, and UNC. For myself, I have UConn, Tennessee, Duke, and Arizona. Who do you have making the national championship game?
Oh, it's a rematch that we never got. UConn and Creighton.
Okay.
It's the rematch everyone wanted in the Big East tournament, but nobody got it. I don't really believe in Purdue. They got to give me something to actually believe in. I know UConn is the trendy pick, and for good reason. I've been saying it all year. They're one of the best teams in college basketball. Even everyone was kind of obsessing over North Carolina or Houston, the same Houston that put up 32 points in their. I think it was 32 points. Right? It was a 41 points. It was 41 points in the conference tournament finals. So give me the team that has not phoned in any games this year, and give me a team that's hungry to kind of get back there in Creighton.
Okay. I agree with UConn. I mean, obviously, we don't have the same Final Four teams in the Final Four,
No,
but I have UConn making the national championship game, and I have them playing Duke. I think Duke can get it done. They would play Tennessee in a hypothetical Final Four situation for me. And again, Duke could realistically lose in the first round, and this would all mean nothing. And it's probably what's going to happen. Um, I'll go with UConn and Duke. Again, it's a matchup probably no one realistically wants to see, especially us two. We don't really want to see that matchup. But after the season I've seen so far for college basketball, where the stuff I want to happen hasn't happened, this is
I
probably going to fit the narrative,
I
and we
would
get
just
that
like to
matchup.
point out a couple members of First Take their bracket. Stephen A has UConn, North Carolina, Purdue, and Texas A&M in his Final Four.
Texas
Love,
A&M.
yep, love the Aggies, but I don't believe it. You
I
can
don't know
see this
about
on the
that.
ESPN mat. And Molly has UConn, Arizona, Houston, and Creighton. I like hers a lot better. Uh,
Except for Houston, but okay. I'm not sold on Houston.
yeah, I mean, and I
Anyway,
would.
and then doesn't Shannon Sharp have all the one seeds?
He has not finished his bracket yet.
How is he not? Okay, whatever. In fairness, I literally finished my bracket maybe an hour ago. That was my first bracket was literally finished an hour ago.
Yeah,
So
so Molly, I hope
okay.
Molly's bracket's correct because she has UConn winning and Creighton getting to the Final Four. So Molly, I hope you're right.
So we'll say. So you have your national championship game. I have UConn versus Duke. You have UConn versus Creighton. Are we both going to agree? Do we think UConn repeats as national champion?
Sure. I
I
mean,
hate to I hate to agree, but
who even
I
cares about mushing it? Because here's the thing: if UConn wins, I'm gonna claim this as a victory for the Big East. If they lose to like I don't know, who are they playing? Stetson.
they would play Stetson, and then who knows after that.
And if they lose to Stetson, I'm gonna laugh my ass off. So
Yeah, it's
I'm
kind of
kind of winning
it's
no
kind of
matter
a
what.
yeah. As I say, it's a win-win for you at the end of the day. If they were to lose to the first round, or just lose before that, or if they just win the entire tournament. Yeah, I have UConn winning as well. I just think you look at their roster, it's just too good not to win. This is even a better roster than they had last season. The last season was a national championship team. I'd be very stunned if they didn't repeat. You would have to tell me who the last when was the last time we had a repeat national champion? Was it Florida?
Florida in 2006, 2007.
So it has been a while since we've had a repeat champion in college basketball, but I think we see it get done this season. I think UConn repeats as champions, and then we'll see because the Big East obviously after what happened with them in the tournament, Selection Sunday, they're looking to reenact some revenge, and maybe for your sake, maybe the three teams that got into the tournament get to the Final Four. But I think we both agree, and it could be biased, but we both have UConn cutting down the nets to winning this year's national championship.
And just as an update, Wagner has a double-digit lead
They
going into
do.
the half against Howard. So,
Go Seahawks.
hell of a job by the Seahawks with 7 scholarship players. They're 20 minutes away from their first ever NCAA victory. So, go Seahawks.
And they would be playing North Carolina in the first round. Hopefully, maybe they pull off the upset because then they'll fit my narrative at Mississippi State. But after all that, Johnson, I know it's been a tough week for us, and obviously Thursday is the start of the official first round games for this NCAA tournament. Any final remarks you want to talk about for maybe just in general before we see the NCAA tournament itself happening this week, or just any lasting remarks on the week we've had so far?
The only thing I want to say is there's 60 spots in the NBA draft every year. There's hundreds upon thousands of players, international players, college players, and the Big East is projected to get 9 players drafted. That's triple the amount of their bids. But hey, what do I know about basketball? These guys who wear the suits definitely know a lot more than me.
All I'm gonna say is I'm not watching the Virginia and Colorado State game later. It's going
Even
to be
Virginia was a if even Virginia was a 1 seed, I wouldn't watch their games anyway.
it's good. That game's gonna be a snooze fest. I might take a little dabble and bet the under in that game because why not? But regardless, this is March. We have to be partial and have to be somewhat excited that the tournament is back around this season. And usually we are, Johnson. But after what happened this week, it's really, really tough to talk about the NCAA tournament. It's going to leave a lasting remark on how we viewed this college basketball season, and we'll have to look towards next season for us as St. John's fans to see if maybe Rick Pitino can get us back in the NCAA tournament next year. So
Please save us, Rick Pitino. I know you did a hell of a job this year.
Great
Everyone
job in
really
year one.
appreciates it. Listen, if you told me St. John's would have finished with 11 wins in the Big East and would
20
have a
wins overall.
semifinal, 20 wins overall, 11 wins in the Big East, and a semifinal appearance against UConn where they lose by 5 points, I would have signed up for this season 100 out of 100 times without even telling me what's going to happen at the end there. So sometimes ping pong balls just don't fall your way, but Rick did a hell of a job, and I'm looking forward to see what he can do with year 2 when he gets more NIL and he has new facilities on the way too.
Yep, that's true. And we are looking forward to see how this entire March Madness bracket goes down for this year's NCAA tournament. Who will be cutting down the nets to becoming the NCAA champion? Will we have as many upsets as we had last season? Who will be this year's Cinderella team? And who will make it to the Final Four and ultimately win that national championship? We got a couple weeks to go. It's gonna be a fun ride watching all these tournament games. And we are on the All Gas No Breaks Sports Show. We'll keep you updated and recap each round as it goes on, and preview the next round, trying to get one step closer to that national championship game. But that's going to do it for tonight's episode of the All Gas No Breaks Sports Show. Conference championship season is now over. We are now in NCAA tournament season. This is, of course, March. And now we got the 68 teams to go. Who will be the 2 teams playing for this year's national championship, and who will be the ultimate team in cutting down the nets and winning this year's national title? We'll have to find out for the next couple of weeks and see who is that national champion. This has been Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson with the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your week.